So much of Africa's history has been lost. It is a land of forgotten kingdoms. Great African empires of the Middle Ages provided the ivory and gold that fueled the Renaissance in Europe. Yet in later centuries, Arabs and Europeans, the very people who benefited most from Africa's bounty, conspired to deny the continent its great legacy. White explorers refused to believe black Africans were capable of anything more than mud huts and pagan beliefs. To justify their exploitation of the Dark Continent, white colonizers claimed Africa's lost civilizations for white ancestors.
There is definitely a deeply ingrained idea in the Western world that Africans are a people without history. Even the Regius Professor of Modern History in my old university, Oxford, in my own lifetime could address a mass audience in the United Kingdom through the media and say, maybe in the future there will be African history. But at the moment, there is none. There is only the history of Europeans in Africa. The rest is darkness. And darkness is not a subject of history.
The great African civilizations relied on an oral tradition to pass on their ancient legends of mighty chiefs and tribal conflicts. Generation after generation heard these stories, but gradually the memories faded. Even the names of kings were forgotten. With no written record, the mighty empires of Africa's past became as vulnerable as their land. "800 years ago, this rugged terrain near the South African border with Zimbabwe was the site of one such kingdom. All outward signs of their civilization have long vanished, yet the local Venda people know, through whispers from their ancestors, that great kings and queens were once buried here, high above the bushveld on the summit of a cliff. A burial ground created with thousands of tons of soil carried here to cover the bare rock of the cliff top. Each body was adorned with gold treasures before the royal graves were sealed. Eight centuries later, in 1932, an Afrikaner adventurer with a thirst for gold persuaded a local villager to take him to the ancestral burial site of Mapungubwe. Today, Ernst van Graan, grandson of the explorer, retraces that journey.
Well, my grandfather, he was a treasure hunter. He was always interested in finding gold, and he was actually looking for this place for almost 5 years.
Centuries of superstition had protected this royal burial ground from theft. Their guide dared not even look at this sacred hill, fearing he would be struck blind.
The local Venda people, they call this hill Mapungubwe, the hill of the jackal. And they call it the hill of the jackal because they believe there's evil spirits and things going around there. When they approached the hill, there was these vertical cliffs, and it seems to be impossible to get onto the hill. And then they found this secret passage going up behind me.
As Van Graan's team began their climb, they found holes carved into the rock face, an ancient stairway to the top of this hidden chimney. They feared the climb to the royal burial site could well be booby-trapped, with giant boulders poised to fall and crush them at any moment. But their ascent was safe. They were about to uncover some of the last remaining royal treasure in all of southern Africa. Normally, recovered gold objects were destined for the melting pot. Another important chapter in African history would have been doomed. And originally that was their plan. Luckily, at the last moment, Van Graan Jr. suffered a pang of conscience. Among the finds were a golden scepter and a gold rhinoceros. Small trinkets compared to Tutankhamun's treasures, yet they were the few precious remaining links to a long-forgotten past. Van Graan had been a history student in Pretoria. He knew the significance of these artifacts and decided to donate them to the university. Though rescued, these treasures remain hidden from public view, locked away in archaeology department vaults. Pottery later excavated at the site proved there was once an enormous settlement at Mapungubwe. Yet to this day, the University of Pretoria has allowed only a few archaeologists access to these remarkable finds. These are the most important artifacts in sub-Saharan Africa, reluctantly brought out to be photographed on special occasions, then locked away again. They might as well still be buried. All this secrecy has its roots in apartheid. Dutch settlers maintained that blacks and whites had arrived in the area at roughly the same time, giving them equal claim to the territory. When radiocarbon dating placed Mapungubwe as early as 1200 AD, white South Africans were stunned. They refused to believe blacks had arrived in the region more than 400 years earlier than the first white settlers. The Afrikaner scientists tested and retested Mapungubwe, making it one of the most radiocarbon-dated sites in all of southern Africa. Yet the result was always the same, 1200 AD.
With many white settlers in southern Africa, much of their argument had rested on the proposition much of this land was, in any case, free of African people. What do you mean it belongs to Africa? We arrived at about the same time as the Africans, so they have no greater claim than we have, so we have as much right as they have. So to tell them that, look, but they were here hundreds of years before you, undermines some of their basic claim to a special status in southern Africa.
This civilization was ancient, it was prosperous, and it was black. But what happened to these people remains a mystery. Perhaps they drove their cattle herds further north to the lusher pastures and cooler climate of higher ground. Or perhaps they became the long-sought ancestors of another African kingdom. For only 100 years later, 200 miles beyond the Limpopo River, one of the greatest African empires would be founded. While Europe was in the Middle Ages, southern Africa was dominated by the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. Their kings ruled from a court enclosed by a colossal circular wall, over 25 feet high and 16 feet thick. Little is known about the empire, Even the names of their kings are now forgotten. We do know they owned thousands of head of cattle and provided ivory and gold to Swahili merchants on the east coast, the first link in Africa's trade network with the world. Today, the country of Zimbabwe takes its name from this ancient kingdom. Zimbabwe means Great House of Stone. Until recently, its real history was denied by white people. They were convinced that black Africans could not have created such monumental structures.